Hello, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. I'm so pleased to have our next project up, Underwater Projects. And to introduce this project and really talk about it, I'm really excited to have Sharon Dorsey, who's part of the Taking Nature Black Planning Committee for this year. And she's been a part of the conference. I first met her back at Naturally Latinos. And she wanted to help in any way. She's a Baltimore native, and she's passionate about connecting the public with nature and promoting urban wildlife research through local organizations such as Masonville Cove, Urban Wildlife Refuge Partnership, Backyard Base Camp, Baltimore Green Space, and the Patuxent Research Refuge, where we're having an immersive nature experience on Saturday. Sign up. She holds a bachelor's degree in environmental science from George Mason University, so my fellow alum, and a master's degree in wildlife conservation from Virginia Tech's Go Hogies for those who are Virginians like me, where she studied the nesting behavior of endangered shorebirds in Long Island, New York. She partners with organizations and nonprofits to facilitate local nature experiences through her business, Sharon Nature LLC. Look her up, support the people in our conference. And she has just been a pleasure to work with. So I'm happy to pass it over to Sharon. Welcome.
Thank you, Lydia. That was a great introduction and a great bio, so thank you. As Lydia mentioned, I was born and raised in the suburbs of Baltimore, Maryland, but I've been working and volunteering throughout the Baltimore City area for the past few years. And before we get into the film and the screening, I wanted to share a little bit of some personal connection I have to the session's topic. So the communities of Baltimore have experienced environmental racism through several forms, including historic redlining, pollution from hazardous facilities, and displacement by large-scale infrastructure projects. One clear example of environmental racism in Baltimore is the lack of tree canopies and green spaces in neighborhoods that were historically redlined. The absence of green spaces contributes to health disparities, leaving residents without the benefits of natural areas that promote physical and mental well-being. Additionally, several neighborhoods have been disproportionately impacted by the placement of hazardous waste facilities near predominantly Black communities, contributing to elevated levels of environmental pollution. Another example is the construction of the infamous Highway to Nowhere back in the 1960s, which led to the demolition of over a mile of thriving Black neighborhoods in Baltimore to make way for an expressway that was never even completed. Intended to connect the growing white suburbs to downtown Baltimore, the incomplete highway remains a symbol of systemic displacement, as Black residents were forced to bear the social and economic costs of a project that ultimately failed to benefit them. And as Baltimore continues to experience rapid development and urban sprawl, neighborhoods across the region also face an increasing risk of flooding, particularly those near rivers and streams. A striking example of this is historic Old Ellicott City, where intense rain events have repeatedly overwhelmed the area's infrastructure since the town's founding in the 1700s and as recently as 2016. As flooding and environmental risks continue to escalate across coastal cities, the impacts on vulnerable communities are becoming even more pronounced. Which brings us to today's film. So in Norfolk, Virginia, a similar pattern of environmental neglect is unfolding, where the sinking city faces a serious risk, particularly to its Black residents in the St. Paul's housing project. The city's seawall, already inadequate to protect the densely populated districts, ends just where the St. Paul's public housing project begins. Norfolk, home to the world's largest naval base, faces an existential threat, yet there is no public plan to stop this potential flooding from happening. Lives, livelihoods, culture, and Virginia's largest economy are all under serious threat from rising waters. In response, the local government, working with federal agencies, has proposed a climate resilience plan, but it involves tearing down the St. Paul's housing project and redeveloping this historic Black community. The short film we're watching today, titled Underwater Projects, dives into the environmental injustice, and redevelopment plans happening in Norfolk. This 28-minute film, which has received widespread praise, explores the challenges faced by the sinking city through a mix of animation, live-action footage, and powerful storytelling. It sheds light on the intersection of rising sea levels, poverty, and systemic environmental racism, while highlighting the resilience of local leaders and community members. Underwater Projects has been selected for numerous prestigious film festivals, including the 2024 DC Environmental Film Festival, the Baltimore International Black Film Festival, and Essence Film Festival, just to name a few. Through the voices of the community leaders, scientists, and climate experts, the film captures the ongoing battle for a sustainable future in the face of climate change. Following the viewing of this film, we'll have the honor of hearing from two people instrumental in the film's creation through their work with the Hip Hop Caucus, Brittany Bell-Surratt and Jarrell Clay. Brittany Bell-Surratt is the Senior Director of Storytelling and Communications for the Hip Hop Caucus, a dedicated marketing, public relations, and crisis communications professional with more than 15 years of experience. Brittany takes pride in creating strategic, integrated communications plans to tell stories that position brands and organizations favorably with stakeholders across agency, corporate, nonprofit, and academic environments. A passionate advocate for young people of color and a natural storyteller, Brittany has devoted her career to advocacy-centered organizations with missions focused on securing equal rights for marginalized communities. Brittany graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in broadcast journalism with a minor in political science from the Howard University. Accompanying her this afternoon is Jarrell Clay, the Associate Senior Director of Digital and Production at the Hip Hop Caucus. He is an activist, entrepreneur, and expert in digital engagement and branding development. He oversees Hip Hop Caucus's digital organizing, content production, and online strategy. As a business owner, Jarrell defines his success by working and advancing economic prosperity for Black and Brown communities. For 15 years, Jarrell has worked as a freelance web designer at Clay & Group, a brand strategy firm representing small businesses and progressive nonprofits. Alongside his 4 part-time business partners, Jarrell has partnered with more than 60 entrepreneurs and organizations working to transform the lives of Black and Indigenous people of color. Jarrell holds a master's degree from Georgetown University and a bachelor's degree from Kent State University. He also serves on the boards of 2 local nonprofits in the DC area, Fast Kids and Speak Out. I'll now turn it over to our tech team, Vince, to start the film, and you can all sit back, relax, and enjoy this powerful documentary, Underwater Projects.
I lost 5 family members in Katrina. The thing about Katrina, the levees, we feel that they were compromised in order to save the areas that were more prosperous. When the water came, it was up to your neck, and for some people, over your head. So families had to make a choice, like this pole right here. How many people can hold on to the pole? The ones that couldn't, they got washed away.
I am originally from Louisiana. All right now, I like that. After Hurricane Katrina, if you can go to a place that was just like that, that was below sea level, that had the same economic disparity, that is worse than New Orleans was. I said that can't be possible. No, there is a place in this country that if they were hit by a Category 1 storm, it would have more disastrous effects. I said, well, where is that place? I'll be there. They said the Hampton Roads, Norfolk area.
I was born in this city in a part called Lambert's Point, a section of the city that knows too well the flooding. We lost homes, we've lost property, we've lost people. The St. Paul Development Project is a major concern for me. Over 7,000 Black residents being displaced, addressing sea level rise. And it's also given opportunity from those from the west side, the wealthy whites, to encroach on the poor blacks and take their land.
When the water comes, I can't promise you that the people that you put in office is gonna come and look out for y'all.
When you are elected, and that's what God has a plan for you, please don't forget about your people who are back in the community. I believe that the Hampton Roads Norfolk can be the place of solution. Yes, you're ground zero. Yes, you're in harm's way. But yes, you can be the solution to the rest of the country and the world to fix this climate crisis.
People keep saying Hampton Roads. What does that mean from your perspective?
Hampton Roads is a way of defining at least 7 cities or surrounding cities, and so we're one big family.
In 1607, some of the earliest colonists would show up here. But shortly after they showed up, the first enslaved Africans in English North America would land somewhere in this area. They landed here, about 20 and odd, and this is a beautiful place, but it has a lot of historical elements to it that relate to African Americans.
Norfolk is one of the top 3 areas in the country vulnerable to sea level rise and coastal flooding. You know, people that live here, this happens almost daily. What's, they call nuisance flooding is becoming chronic. At some point in time, chronic becomes debilitating.
Is it safe? Is it safe for the fish in this environment?
River, it was a very polluted river.
I was gonna ask, is this like typical, like, oh, it's fun, it's King Tide Day, and
My bad. Is this safe for people? I went straight to the fish.
You was worried about the fish. They live
Wait,
here.
is that bass gonna be okay?
There are other places in the area that aren't yet flooding from tides. But when sea level rise comes up, there will be new places that resemble this.
I remember one time we had a real bad storm and the underpass was literally flooded. That's 15 feet and it's flooded like it was like an Olympic swimming pool.
You be driving along and thinking things are fine, and then all of a sudden you're in a big puddle of water that gets deeper.
My son was driving, the water came in so quickly, he couldn't open his doors. I got a phone call with him devastated about, the fear of drowning.
Is that part of life that we grow up thinking about? You know what? Your car might get flooded. Yeah. You don't think that you need a boat too?
The nor'easter that happened a few years back where they really did have the kayaks in Ocean View. Like in the middle of the street, they had boats.
And then you have to think about the seniors that will not leave their home during these storms.
I'm not trying to see my area on the news with body counts and we can't find this person, we can't find these people, whole neighborhoods are gone. Like, I'm not trying to see that. We've gotten very close a bunch of times, and what's happening now is obviously not working.
Most Americans think action needs to be taken right now to address climate change.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
What do you believe about the science of climate change, and what will you do in the next 4 years to confront it?
We spend billions of dollars now on floods, hurricanes, rising seas. We're in real trouble. And here's the deal.
Talking about the Green New Deal, and it's not $2 billion or $20 billion, as you said. It's $100 trillion.
Let me
destroy our
because
country.
I actually.
So I'm Mama D. I'm the founder and the CEO for Teens with a Purpose. Thousands of teenagers have come through this program since we started in 1996. Every day when I come in, I think about a hurricane. In a minute, it can all be swept away. I've seen the flood wall and how it stops at the St. Paul's Quadrant, and I equate that to how intentionally this city was designed for one community to have certain things and for the community with the public housing to have less things.
So in downtown, we have a flood wall, and if you notice, if I go up, to say a pretty severe flood event, normally this would flood. If I go back to this historic map, downtown Norfolk's right here, there used to be a creek here. It would be severely flooded if we did not have a downtown flood wall.
Why didn't it originally get built to extend that far?
It's hard to say exactly why back then, but I think it's probably sort of how the benefit cost analysis came out. This is $1 billion a year in tax revenues for the city. And this public housing and what little bits over here is a few $100,000. And then you look at where the flood happens. Folks that are socially vulnerable are actually in these more flood-prone areas.
Friendly refers to those communities that are most vulnerable to extreme weather events and the communities that have endured a history of austerity and neglect, of racism, the ones that are dealing with COVID, the ones that are dealing with cops, the ones that are dealing with climate change, the same communities. Those are that's the front line.
Native people of Hampton Roads area were the Kickintan, which is Newport News and Hampton, the Chesapeakes, who were Virginia Beach and Norfolk, the Nasman, which was part of Suffolk, Norfolk, Chesapeake, Isle of Wight. The waterways were our highways.
When we talk about climate change, it feels a little bit like a continuation of the destruction that we watched for the past 400 years. We knew from the beginning that cutting down the entire old-growth forest in Virginia was not going to be a good idea, but that didn't stop the English from doing it.
You know, Wanda Sykes is a Portsmouth native.
You may just do a read through. Good catch. Asbestos? Yeah, we say asbestos in Norfolk. All right, so here's a super abridged history of Norfolk. Around 35 million years ago, a rock from space slammed into what is now Virginia, and besides really ruining the days of a couple of dinosaurs, it also left an intense crater, which made the water around what is now Norfolk deep. Fast forward to when Virginia was a colony. Pirates from the Caribbean bought tobacco from farmers in the area, and then probably smoked it back at their island bases with Jack Sparrow or whatever. The important thing is that they didn't pay taxes, which made the King of England so damn mad. To get in on that pirate tobacco money, can I say booty? The king built a port and forced all of the ships to do their business there so he could tax them. Thinking ahead wasn't exactly the King of England's cup of tea. So he built this port stupidly by simply filling all the creeks and rivers with a ton of dirt and called it good. You might be wondering, why no one warned the King of England about this being a really bad idea? Trust me, people totally did. A lot. When the king started filling rivers with dirt, the Powhatan people who'd lived there for a long time and had at least a basic grasp of physics said, hey, don't fill in the creeks and rivers. The water is going to find a way to flow in its natural path. And the king said, nah, I got this. And the Powhatan people said, are you sure? And the king said, ooh, I can't understand your mystical native language. And the Powhatan said, dude, we're speaking English. And the king said, sorry, I can't hear you over the sound of all this colonialism. LOL. Until the Powhatan said, whatever, man, rolled their eyes and left the chat. Now, hundreds of years later, as Norfolk started flooding, people are all shocked face emoji about it. Oh, I just got a notification from my news app. It turns out Norfolk is flooding because of sea level rise from the climate crisis and from the water finding its natural pre-colonial past. Wow, who would have saw that coming? Oh, right, everybody. In short, if you want to blame someone for Norfolk flooding, blame the King of England and the climate crisis. And for the record, if I had $1 for every time Black, Indigenous, and people of color told colonizers to stop doing something dumb as hell, and the colonizers did it anyway and effed everything up for everybody, I would have $1 kajillion. Ka-ching!
We know why people may want to leave. Why should people come here?
Norfolk has 5 wonderful, comprehensive institutions of higher learning. Norfolk has an international airport. Norfolk has a port. Norfolk has a cruise terminal. Norfolk is the only city with light rail. So Norfolk is the place where we want you to come to live, to work, to play, and to create.
I'm ready to pack my bags.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's go to Norfolk.
Let me get on the rail.
Let's move in.
You're a veteran of the Navy?
No, my husband is, but I'm an Army brat.
Okay.
My dad's retired Army.
I was in ROTC in high school, and that's the
That doesn't
extent.
count.
That don't count? NJROTC?
Yak is a Chinese soul food. It's been around for a very long time.
You do soy sauce?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Soy sauce, please. Thank you.
Then you do a ketchup.
Man, this is where it gets hard to...
What is something that you hold dear to yourself about Norfolk?
It's a melting pot between the HBCUs that are here, Norfolk State HU, between the largest naval base in the world here. It's everybody that has different types of backgrounds, and they all come together here. That's what I loved about this area.
So the naval base in Norfolk equates for the largest percentage of any industry. There's also the Langley Air Force Base. NASA, we need to take action on climate. And I think the military understands the seriousness of it, but the region has to also be a part of it because naval officers and seamen are going to be living in the community.
Like any classic story, all of this takes us straight to the American military and the global pursuit for oil. The climate crisis has caused a lot of the Arctic to melt, creating new waterways, which means new access to oil resources. Cha-ching! In 2018, Trump decided to protect this sweet crude oil by reinstating our Navy's second fleet, which Obama had decommissioned back when he was in the White House. But where do we place a whole ass fleet of the U.S. Navy? That's right, fancy pants, Hampton Roads, which hosts the largest Navy base in the world, Naval Station Norfolk. Not only is Naval Station Norfolk home to the Second Fleet, it is also home to 80,000 active duty service members, most of America's F-22 fighters, and 75 ships. Virginia receives more defense spending than any other state. But all this military infrastructure is going underwater from the same melting ice that the Second Fleet from Norfolk is up in the Arctic patrolling. Yeah, messed up. The fate of public housing residents in the St. Paul's district of Norfolk and the fate of our military are tied together in a very real way.
From what I have been told from older people around the surrounding area, that in the 70s, they were actually built to be naval homes. I guess the Navy didn't like them, and when they didn't move into them, they then converted them as a way for the city to make money for low-income housing.
Mayors before and others have attempted to address the flooding, the lack of connectivity, because St. Paul's, for the most part, was cut off from the rest of the city, the rest of downtown, and that was done intentional. At one point, you didn't have any streets that actually, went through St. Paul's. You had to, the persons who had cars had to park on the periphery. And these are barrack-style homes that were built more than 60 years ago. Public housing. At the time, it was new housing. But the model hadn't changed. Very little redevelopment and improvements to that infrastructure.
Mayor Alexander is spitting facts, but in order to fully understand highways and St. Paul's public housing projects, let's get some context. In the 1930s housing crisis, amidst the Great Depression, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, aka FDR, aka Young New Deal, proposed that public housing be the new wave. Utopias for poor Americans envisioned as thriving communities to live, laugh, love, learn, and take no more L's. Hopefully, even move on up. With the New Deal came the Federal Housing Administration and the GI Bill, aka you get a mortgage and you get a mortgage, everyone gets a mortgage! Dope, right? Well, not for black people. They weren't giving these mortgages to us. And then in the 40s, the corporate bigwigs got their hair pieces and monocles together to ask, how are we going to get this economy on and popping once more? You know how those monocles talk. And came up with one answer: highways. Boom. So the car companies and developers got their lobby on, and we got the Federal Highway Act of 1956. Highway construction chopped through poor black and brown communities within cities, displacing people from their homes and cutting off their neighborhoods from the rest of the city, while literally paving the way for white flight to the suburbs. And for black and brown communities, all of this sucked more than a 1960s vacuum cleaner. Finally, the Fair Housing Act of 1968 was passed. However, redlining and racist mortgage lending had a 34-year head start, and with highways actively displacing black and brown families, to put it lightly, fair housing had a bumpy rollout. By the 80s, the media narrative of public housing failures had won out, and ever since, it's been a slow and steady effort to tear down public housing and enter into a new era of policy solutions for low-income families who need housing assistance. St. Paul's, like many public housing communities around the country, is more prone to climate flooding than the rest of the city, further complicating the question of what to do about public housing and families who need housing support.
Black folks have a lot to worry about, but we're very resilient, and we understand that this is an issue that affects us more than everybody else. This myth that black and brown people don't have the resources or time to address the climate crisis. They have been addressing climate injustice in a lot of ways that people just haven't really called climate work.
People like to think climate refugees are somewhere else, but there are climate refugees right here in the United States. They are uprooted from their culture, from their traditions, from their beliefs, from everything that makes them have a longer life.
Welcome to Fire Farms, the hottest peppers on the block. Got my man Daquan right here. About to take you through soup to nuts. But we won't make no soup, we won't make no nuts. We got the jalapenos. What else we got in the market?
We got some jalapenos, some bell peppers, some collards.
Keep going.
And some apple trees.
Apple trees, bars, apple trees.
So y'all have the community garden outside, and I heard that it was kind of your idea. Well,
Yeah, it was a food desert. We can't go nowhere. We need something here. So I thought of the garden, and Mama D, she was like, all right, let's do it.
I think the first thing I noticed was the impact it had on the sound of traffic. Somehow the garden buffered it. It sounded softer. We used to mainly smell car fumes, and we didn't smell them anymore because we were growing things. Flooding, look around, they just look like a big circle with soil and some flowers growing out of it, but it absorbed the rain, and there was less flooding.
The other thing is, and that what we've seen often, is that when we invest in our communities and we green them up, and we hook them up with green amenities, that we get displaced from the communities we've been fighting for. Think about it. You spend your life breathing in bad air, drinking bad water, and you give your extra time, you give your spirit in trying to transform it so that privileged people can then just push you right out. My God, that is exactly what is happening in every one of our neighborhoods.
We're here in Chesterfield Heights, which is one of the first big neighborhood projects here in Norfolk to make the neighborhood more resilient to sea level rise. It's about a $1.2 million project. The people here in Chesterfield Heights, when we brought the students in, they would meet with the community, come up with designs, go back and say, this is what you want? No, that'll never work. This street doesn't work that way, whatever. In St. Paul's, there really wasn't that kind of engagement in what do you want to see your community look like in 10 years. It was more, this is what this community is going to look like in 10 years. The difference between Chesterfield Heights and St. Paul's is the ownership. In this neighborhood, a lot of owner-occupied, that house is owned by one person, a lot of owner-occupied houses. In St. Paul's, the city owns it.
You said you really don't focus on the why this is happening.
It can be hard depending on, so who's in the White House and things like that. We weren't allowed to call projects, sea level rise and flooding projects. They were infrastructure projects, right? So if you start getting into that why, at least in this administration, it can hurt your opportunity for funding and support from these agencies. So that's one way to think about the why. We don't get into the why, but regardless of the why, in the data, we know it's happening.
As obvious as it was said in this meeting, it was just like, well, we don't want to focus on why because then that would affect the money that we have to fund the project. And I think the essential part is to focus on why this is happening so we can protect it from not getting worse.
Let's talk about money, 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 money. I'm going to throw some numbers at you. The federal government promised Norfolk $30 million to break ground on redeveloping St. Paul's public housing, which is in a flood-prone area. $30 million is a lot of money, and that's cool of them. Or it would be cool of them if Norfolk didn't need $1 billion to get the St. Paul's redevelopment ready for all of this flooding. That's billion with 9 zeros. And that's just St. Paul's redevelopment. Norfolk overall needs an additional $1.8 billion to build its infrastructure. And the whole Hampton Roads area, that's 6 other cities, needs even more money. That's so much money. That money is to deal with flooding. They're gonna need a lot more cash if they want to be ready for hurricane season and the economic fallout of it all and the cost of human displacement. However, the price tag goes way down if we actually address the climate crisis. Throwing money at floods without addressing the climate crisis is like your house catching on fire, and instead of putting the fire out, you go on Google and buy a pair of underpants made out of asbestos. It'd be cheaper and way easier to just put the fire out, right? Investing in climate change solutions isn't gonna fix all of Norfolk's flooding problems. But if we address this stuff now, it's gonna cost way less than if we address it later. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some asbestos underpants to buy. My house isn't on fire. I just like how they look, okay?
The threat of false solutions is that it moves us slowly when climate change is moving really quickly. We're now living in the age of climate change, where we're seeing thousands of people completely disappear as a result of the impacts of greedy corporate extractors. Given what we know about climate change, 4 more years of Trump when he's already been aggressively deregulating environmental protections that protect our children. And remember that the solutions don't just lie in EPA. In the Department of Labor, the Department of Energy, the Department of Agriculture. He has made it impossible for people to even say within those agencies climate change. I often use the example of Puerto Rico because it was close to 5,000 Puerto Ricans that died. And I say, if it had been 3,000 blonde-haired, blue-eyed women, they would have been up in arms about that. You can imagine what 4 years brings to us. It literally is almost a death sentence for so many of the people in our community.
Hold up. How are we the ones being hurt the worst by a climate crisis that we contribute to the least? Well, at school, the gang always show us behind every mystery is a rich white man. So let's follow the money. Ruh-roh. Fossil fuels, which are oil, coal, and natural gas, have to be extracted from the earth, refined, and burned, creating pollution. Yeah, this turns out not great to breathe in. To add insult to injury, this pollution and toxic air is found in higher concentrations where Black people, indigenous folks, and people of color live. Study after study shows our families, friends, and kids are much more likely to live near these places and die because of pollution than white folks. For us, it's like taking one lifelong drag from a fossil fuel cigarette, which puts us at risk for, let's just say, a bunch of bad stuff. It's like a throwback mesothelioma commercial. Due to exposure to toxic pollutants, you may not be entitled to legal compensation, but you should be. Pollution heats up the planet and contributes to worldwide climate disasters, including but not limited to hurricanes, heat wave, food shortages leading to famine and starvation, the spread of infectious diseases, economic catastrophes, and mass displacement of whole populations in the global south and global north, including Norfolk, Virginia. Whew! And that's the short list. Systemic racism means that it's harder for people of color to bounce back from disasters, and we already have a lot of oppression on our plate. Just a sad-ass plate of injustice al dente that we didn't order with no help sprinkled on top. So a recap for those of you who might have gotten up to go to the bathroom. Old rich fossil fuel tycoons have all the money and buy politicians for the freedom to ruin our environment with fossil fuel swaggerless yacht parties and fracka-lacka-lacking. And we are left with dirty air, dirty water, climate disasters, health crises, shorter lifespans, and all this injustice that I have to remind you we did not order.
It's definitely going to take the younger generation connecting with the older generation and the politicians connecting with the creatives, you know what I'm saying? And we got to figure this out. We don't have any other choice but to figure this out for our future.
I think that Norfolk has a history of urban renewal being Negro removal. Whoever is going to be our representative on city council, I want to make sure that they speak to those issues. Everything that we do, from whether or not you have a stoplight, whether or not you have a street light, whether or not your water is cut on or not, all those things come from individuals who are elected in policy positions making decisions on your behalf.
It's local governments control almost all of the pieces that have to do with whether somebody stays or goes or is in the right place or the wrong place. Because local governments control land use, they control where the roads are, they control the utilities, they control building permits, building codes, all that stuff.
So I want to introduce a national civil rights, social justice leader, Reverend Lennox Yearwood.
When Katrina hit New Orleans, 1,833 people lost their lives. I couldn't be in New Orleans in 2004, but I can be in Hampton Roads, Norfolk, and I can be right here, right now, talking to you about what we can do as a community to combat this climate crisis. That's what this is about.
Thank you for coming into the space, all of you, and for wanting to, just connect with us and know who we are and know our part of the story. We get a little piece of heaven every day, but it's a lot of hard work. And now I will add to it, and heartache. I will come back out and rebuild as many times as anything is destroyed, but some things you cannot get back. The craziest part about the whole thing is, even though it's nature, there are things that man can do. If little old us with a little old half-an-acre garden could grow tomatoes that takes carbon out of the air, why isn't that happening everywhere in communities like ours?
As a community, we are not using our voices as much as we should. And we have a lot of issues that need to be solved. And if we really stood up and tried to fix those a little bit more, then we could see the changes that we want to happen.
I actually moved closer to downtown Norfolk. I'm literally in downtown Norfolk. I'm very sad because things that I grew up with, I can't go there anymore and reminisce about it. If this is happening in your community, change it, do something about it, speak up, you have a voice.
I encourage anybody that feels any type of way about this revitalization project or how things are going. We, the people of Norfolk, we hold a lot of power. If we educate ourselves in that matter, a lot of these things can change. It's strength in numbers.
Let's go get it. So make sure and vote. I get a life depend on it because the life does depend on it. This coming Tuesday, and then keep organizing and mobilizing and energizing. Do all you can do for the next 12 months to make sure that the people are first. Somebody make some noise. All power to the people. Thank you.
I don't know about you, but I'm fired up. Y'all fired up?
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm fired up. Are you fired up? I am so excited. Thank you, thank you. I hope you enjoyed that documentary as much as I did on flooding in the Hampton Roads area. And we will have that incredibly inspirational speaker in the documentary, Reverend Lennox Yearwood. He will be joining us for a fireside chat tomorrow with Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali. But I am so thankful to have with us two of the Hip Hop Caucus's own, Jarrell Clay and Brittany Bell Surratt, to talk with us about the Hip Hop Caucus and this film and their process. So I'm going to start with a question to Brittany. Tell us a little bit more about the Hip Hop Caucus and what made them focus in the little old area of Hampton Roads.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm very honored to be in community with you all and appreciate you all taking the time to watch the film. So Hip Hop Caucus is a national nonprofit. We have two offices, an office in DC and an office in LA. And what we do is we use hip hop culture as a bridge between community advocacy, policy, and activism. And so our main issues that we focus on are civil and human rights, economic justice, environmental justice, and my nervous is escaping me. Environmental justice, economic justice, and help me out, Jarrell.
So voter mobilization through respect my vote.
Civic engagement
Yeah.
and democracy. And that's actually our biggest one. Well, that and environmental justice. But so that's who we are. And that's kind of what we do. And how we ended up focusing on Norfolk really is we are always assessing how climate is affecting populations with large numbers of Black people in an area. And so often that is left out of the conversation. And so we feel like as an organization, we have an opportunity to fill that gap. If there's anybody in here from the Hampton Roads, Norfolk area, as mentioned in the film, there are a lot of HBCUs there. There are a lot of Black folks there. And so we were making the connection with what's happening or what happened with Hurricane Katrina and the rising sea levels there in the New Orleans and down in the Gulf. And then, of course, as you also saw in the film, along Virginia. And so when we started making this film, this actual documentary came out of another documentary. So we were filming a documentary that we have. It's a climate comedy stand-up called Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave. And while filming Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave, and all of the footage for that, this bubbling storyline was forming as well. And so our executive director and the producers at the time saw a through line and was like, oh, we should also tell this story. And so that's how that came about.
Thank you, Brittany. And I love the use of hip hop. And it's funny that we talk about this today when Dr. Parker led us off with a line from Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us. And we know hip hop can be such a powerful way of expressing ourselves and expressing where we are as a community in stories that aren't mainstream at the time. I wonder, Jarrell, can you share with us what the hip hop caucuses, what are the things you value in your storytelling process? How do you kind of go about deciding, you pulled Wanda Sykes, how do you kind of go about thinking through putting together a story, a documentary, and really making it accessible to everyone?
Thank you, Lydia, and good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, just thank you for joining us. Want to thank the Nature Forward and the Taking Nature Black team just for creating this space, allowing Brittany and I to be in community with y'all. That's an interesting question, and I think it goes back to just the power of artivism, where art and activism meet to drive climate justice. At Hip Hop Caucus, we believe that culture is more of a powerful force for the change that we enact in racial, climate, and economic justice. Nowhere is that more evident than in how we tell our stories through music, through film, through the voices of artists that help us move folks to action. I think Underwater Projects is one of the most compelling examples of that. And we released the film to highlight that devastating impact of the climate crisis on Black and frontline communities. We do look at this film, as we do all of our storytelling projects, as a call to action. It does reveal the reality that for too many of us, the climate crisis isn't in some distant future. It's happening right now. Families are losing their homes. Communities are being displaced. And while some are trying to erase our history in schools, entire histories are being washed away by the climate crisis. But as we know, these stories often go untold in the mainstream narrative around global warming and climate change. And so that's why artivism for us is so critical. It helps break through the noise. It moves beyond the stats and the policies to reach people on a human level. We know that change won't happen in boardrooms. We know that it doesn't happen in congressional suites. It will happen in the streets. It'll happen at community gatherings. It'll happen on our screens. It happens through our stories and during convenings like this. We should note that, as you noted in the beginning with the Kendrick bar, that storytelling is nothing new to the culture. Hip hop itself was born out of struggle and our quest for prosperity, out of communities using creativity as a means of resistance. And today, that same energy fuels our quest for liberation, and also many social justice movements, including climate justice. And that's why we empower, or we must empower, artists, filmmakers, storytellers, to help our people and communities see themselves in the fight. Because for us, that's what it's all about. Many folks, if they don't see themselves in it, they won't act. And so, as we know, climate change isn't just an environmental issue, it's a racial issue, it's an economic issue. And so what we do with that energy is mobilize. We vote, we advocate for policies that protect our communities, but we also find a story to tell as opposed to trying to create stories to move folks, because the stories are there, they just need to be amplified.
I mean, that's so important. And what I loved about the storytelling of this piece is that it was so multifaceted. You went into the history, you went into the city ownership, who funds what, who gets left out. And when I think about the mission that you just shared of the Hip Hop Caucus, of promoting economic justice and civic engagement and environment and all of these different facets, do you see them as separate in the stories that you choose to promote, or do you feel like you have to choose a particular subject, one versus another? How do you kind of go through that process?
For us, all of these things are intersectional. And I'm hoping for you all too. But a lot of times people do, separate these issues and aren't making the connection. And that's a huge mistake. But I think it's a huge mistake in understanding, just how the ripple effect of climate affects our health, affects our paychecks, affects our education, affects so many different things, infrastructure and housing. And so what we try to do is we try to make sure we make the connection and make it plain. And so, we did that here with connecting the history of all what happened, all centuries ago, and how you see it manifesting to today, and how it's affecting us in very real ways.
Thank you. All right, before we move to audience questions, I want to ask one more from both of you, because that film was just so amazing. I know our audience will want to hear. For people going through wanting to make a story, what do you suggest to successfully communicate the issue they want to highlight?
So I would say from a producer's perspective, it's again, it's not about making the story, it's about amplifying what is already there. There are so many natural storytellers in community, but they often don't have the resources or the vehicles to tell that story well. And so when creating a pathway for it, it is about emphasizing and prioritizing the authenticity of the story, but also making sure that when we do line up storyboards and things like that, that the community that you're telling the story about is ingrained in that process every step of the way. So authenticity and inclusivity are the two things that I would highlight in terms of making the story, if you will. But also just having a passion for the story that you are telling. There's a certain amount of magic and sauce that goes into the process when you care. If you're going into a community and you're just having a camera in front of someone, you aren't going to be able to tell the story the same way that a cinematographer can come in who is deeply connected to the issue, because they know about things that they want to highlight, accentuate, things like that. And so I'll add passion to authenticity and inclusion.
Authenticity, passion, and inclusion. Love it. Brittany, do you have anything to add before we move to audience questions?
I would add to start, just make the thing. As we've seen with a lot of emerging media, as we've seen with content creation and social media, as we saw with a 50-part series from somebody named Risa Tisa, you can just tell there's so many low barriers to entry for telling a story that you can just start. And once you make that start, then you can start to think about how you want to really strategize and build an audience and who you want to talk to and what methods and all of those things. But I think particularly in this moment of time where we are um, in society and what's happening in politics and our history, you got to just tell the story. So I would say that.
All right, thank you. Y'all hear, anyone can be an influencer for environmental justice if you have passion, authenticity, and inclusivity. So with that, I'm going to turn to our first question. And I want to hear y'all's thoughts on how we can best use our artistry to communicate the message of community stewardship, specifically to our youth.
Meet the youth where they are. I would start there. So often we build platforms, we have events, and we expect for really any audience, but a particular audience to come to us, and this is the time when we should go to them. So whatever that medium is, whether that's schools, whether that's, online platforms where the youth are and are engaging. I would say I would say probably being in community. I think we're at a time also now where uh, in-person community of all ages is people are looking for it. People are seeking that community. And so I think finding out where the youth are and going to them. I would start there. And then making sure that whatever your artistry is, it's accessible for the youth or whatever audience that you're targeting or that you want to connect with. Too. I would say those things. Jarrell, anything you add?
I agree. And I think nothing illustrates that better than what Mama D has been able to do with Teens with a Purpose. They often bring in music, poetry as a way to bring in the youth of the Hampton Roads area and then turn that into social change for the community as we illustrate in the film.
Thank you. And I think if we've seen anything in this conference, it's how impactful our young people can be, especially when it comes to art and poetry and music. We've had some great artists who are young. Okay. Brittany, this one may be for you since you helped a lot with the editing of this documentary. What guidelines do people need to create an underwater project, any underwater project story in other areas?
I think the question may be kind of like what's needed to create a documentary like this.
Yes.
So I wasn't the editor. I just in my role oversee all of the departments, including digital production and the different assets that come out of that. And so we actually worked with a filmmaker, Dreamhampton, on as a creative consultant on this, who advised us in the editing process that we really needed to cut it down. And then we worked with Jarrell leads our actual production department, and then we worked with the editors on doing that. But I would say what's needed. I guess it depends on from what standpoint. Like, are you saying as far as like crew, personnel, equipment type what's needed, or are you saying like concept, green light, having some type of loose scripting or storyboarding. Um, there's so many different pieces to creating a film, and it can be really as complex or as simple as you make it. To be honest, I think it just depends on what level of production you're trying to do, and then what kind of distribution you want done, and how formal of a process or informal of a process. So I think it's really kind of a loaded question. But happy to talk with, I know we have a limited amount of time, but happy to talk with anybody outside of this to kind of talk through, some of the different ways. But Jarrell is excellent at summarizing things. So he may be able to give you more of like a 1, 2, 3 than how my brain is working about it.
No, I think this is something that Brittany outlined earlier, which is just get started. I mean, I'm not going to assume anyone's age, but I'm going to assume that we are all familiar with Spike Lee and his notion to just get out there with a camera and film the story that is already being told. Creativity is your guideline. That is how we bring to fruition the stories that we want to tell and have it meet and reach audiences, within the community, but also internationally, depending on how big you want to tell the story.
Thank you. Great advice from both of you. We'll go for possibly a less complex question. Someone shared, "This is a great movie. How can we watch it at home?"
So I could take this one first, and then Brittany, if you have anything to add, please do. This film is one that we are hosting with community screenings, but also during film festivals. We were highlighted in 10 film festivals last year, including the Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival, Essence Fest, and others. This year, we are focusing a lot more on community screenings versus the film festivals. And so for us, it would be an opportunity to share that you all can host a community screening in your area. All you have to do is fill out the form that we put in the chat, and our team would be in contact with you to host that. We are also in conversations about what a distribution strategy looks like with the film so that it will be publicly available for anyone to see at any time. That is more of a long-term strategy for us, but right now, you do have the option to host your own community screening where you can share it with anyone that you would like, either through a watch party at your house or at someone's church or at the barbershop. Wherever you want to host that community screening is completely up to you, but we do offer it as a resource.
Thank you, Jarrell. And I can attest from personal experience that the Hip Hop Caucus has been very generous in contributing this film and many of their people to talk about it as part of Taking Nature Black. Wonderful to work with. So fill out that form and broadcast this film widely. Okay. On the subject of flooding, and I don't know, Jarrell and Brittany, if you've been able to encounter this in your work with the Hip Hop Caucus, but have you been able to observe, how effectively different municipalities or states or just areas of this country are collaborating on the effort of flood resilience?
So I think I'll take this question because we've been loving all the feedback and questions in the app. And been ready to answer some of them. I saw this one and kind of connected it to the question around Norfolk County and wanted to just kind of take both of those into one. And it's really, because this also links to what we see in New Orleans, is what we've seen in the Bronx where hip hop was created, right? And it's this idea of breaking up the counties, and it goes back to racial relations and waterways and highways, right? We talk about in all of those stories, the real the reality of white flight and segregation. That is where once you break up these counties into different municipalities, it then becomes a race for those municipalities to compete for infrastructure resources, for zoning laws, school districting. All of these infrastructure decisions then go to that city, and they have to essentially compete with other municipalities. And so when you have a municipality that is primarily people of color, we've seen not only through history, but across the nation, including in Hampton Roads and Norfolk County, or what was Norfolk County, that those resources then get put toward municipalities that have better resources and prosperity from a tax code perspective. And so that, again, breakup meant that they had the jurisdiction in interconnected waterways, and bringing it back to Norfolk County, we're talking about the Elizabeth River, we're talking about Chesapeake Bay. That also led to inconsistent environmental policies and challenges. And so when we talk about flood walls, dredging, industrial impacts, we see across the nation that those facilities are being built closer to Black and brown neighborhoods than they are to other neighborhoods. And we also see that pollution is higher too. And so when we talk about collaboration, we have to think about the people who live in those municipalities. They're going to advocate for their constituents first before thinking about how their advocacy then impacts the rest of the folks in their county. And that is where our artivism and our advocacy becomes so much more important, because we need to be in the rooms and at the table. And in some cases, we need to be not only at the table, but the ones leading the table, which gets back to our civic engagement work and how we can get involved in that.
Thank you, Jarrell. And I was wondering, a follow-up question. We only have a few minutes left. But one person was wondering, have you worked with other comedians? I know Not Your Mama's Heat Wave was based in with comedians, but I think maybe to the larger point, Wanda Sykes is a celebrity, very well known. Has the Hip Hop Caucus been able to work with other performers to really engage people in storytelling and your mission?
Yes. So we have an artist and influencer relations department. One thing that, Jarrell, if you don't mind sharing in the chat, that we love for you all to check out on the same kind of line of climate comedy, is we had an animated series called Green Justice League. And that animated series, we hired BIPOC comedians and writers to do voiceover and animation for the series. And so we covered a few different environmental issues. And so we've done that. A few actors and actresses and comedians we worked with, Kiki Palmer, Esteban Gast, who has done quite a bit. We've worked with Regina Hall. And so, just to name like a few. But yeah, we are always looking to add folks to our what we call artivist list, and those are artists who are activists and doing issue-based work. So if anybody ever has any suggestions, please follow Hip Hop Caucus on Instagram or LinkedIn or TikTok. We're not as responsive on X. We do post there, but we're trying to pull back our engagement. But we are in those places, and would love to talk with you all. And Jarrell, if you want to add anybody that stands out.
All right. Well, thank you both, Brittany and Jarrell, for having this conversation on the art of storytelling to highlight environmental justice issues in an intersectional way. I think that's so important, and thank you so much for your time, your insight, and for sharing underwater projects with the Taking Nature Black audience. So at this, yes, Brittany.
Before we leave, I do want to use this time and this platform while we have so many people here to inform folks that the organization that you saw in the video, Mama D's organization, they have lost significant funding because there were federal grants that they were operating off of that they've been caught up in this sweep of loss of federal funding. So I saw Inga Skippings here, who I used to work with at Spitfire Strategies. And so if there are folks who are doing any pro bono consulting or have any resources in which they could possibly, reach out and support, please do so.
Thank you so much, Brittany, and thank you for highlighting an organization on the ground that is doing the work. So many of the organizations in our community are impacted. I have dropped the link to support Mama D's Teens with a Purpose in the Hoover chat. Please, please consider giving. You saw in the documentary, it wasn't just flooding, it was engaging teens, planting green infrastructure, getting your hands in the dirt and gardening and giving the youth in that community a purpose. So please take time and visit the link in the chat for Mama D's Teens with a Purpose. Thank you, Brittany, for highlighting that. So it is now time for us to go to break. We have a 10-minute break before our last keynote. And y'all, you do not want to miss our final keynote. You have seen her book highlighted in these sessions for the last few days. You have heard her name. And Jamani and I did not even plan for speakers to highlight her, but this is how much of a pillar she is in the environmental community. We will be having Dr. Carolyn Finney, the author of Black Faces, White Spaces, as our final keynote today. So go to the bathroom, grab your snacks, and we will be coming back at 2:25 to hear Dr. Finney speak. And we will, before we go on break, make sure you visit our sponsors. Thank you to Howard Hughes Medical Institute, who has made, showing underwater projects, having Brittany and Jarrell, having Dr. Finney possible. But come back to us at 2:25 for Dr. Carolyn Finney's keynote to close out our day. Thank you, Jarrell. Thank you, Brittany, for being with us.
Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you all.
And the entire team.
Bye. Bye.